But the reason that we have a liberal democracy that has a state as opposed to just a pure market, and many people will talk about this reason differently, but like the kind of foundational reason that is argued for is that markets will have a market for human trafficking, or for organ harvesting, or for organized crime, or maybe to cut all the wood in an area down and there's no state park left, or whatever it is. So there can be perverse incentives in markets that are good in the short term, but really bad in the long term, or good for some people, bad for others. And so we say, okay, there are some things, market does innovation and production well, but it also does extraction and kind of pathological stuff. So we want to bind the predatory aspects of market. Well, how do we do that? Well, we'll make a state, and we'll give it this thing called rule of law. And then we'll give it this thing called monopoly of violence, which is the police force internally that can, so we make a national forest, right? So we're not going to cut down the trees here. We can cut down the trees here, but not here. And then if someone goes and is cutting the trees down there, the cops are going to show up. And if those guys have guns, the cops have bigger guns. The monopoly of violence, because without enforcement, law doesn't really mean anything, right? It's just kind of a suggestion. And then incentive is still going to be the thing that runs it. So this is a system that supposedly, rather than based on incentive, can bind predatory incentive. So the purpose of the state primarily is to check the predatory aspects of market, where people would have an incentive to do something that we kind of collectively want to agree is not a thing to do. But then the people are supposed to bind and check the state. That's the idea of governance of, for, and by the people, is how do we ensure that the market interests, where the money and the power is, don't just capture the regulatory interests and say, hey, change this thing in my benefit and your Swiss bank account will get filled up and you'll have a house to use in the Hamptons and whatever else. Well, the only way to ensure that you don't get regulatory capture is if there's enough transparency in government and the people are educated enough and actively involved that they get to see that the government is actually doing rule of law rather than other things. Think about how far the citizens here, or pretty much anywhere, are from being able to understand the issues that are happening at the level of federal government and actually have transparent insight and are actively involved in a way that would kind of police the thing. So of course then what happens is you do get regulatory capture, because as the people aren't checking the state stops checking the market, the predatory aspects of the market starts to follow a power law distribution, and those who have the most resources, who have asymmetric power, have both the capacity and the incentive to increase their asymmetric power. And that's through a bunch of things. It's through marketing and affecting the mindsets of the people. It's through affecting news and media. It's through the capture of regulatory systems, all of those different types of dynamics. And the last part of this system, so the state checks the market, the people check the state, then the market or the underlying economy itself checks the people, which means that the thing that the people want, the accounting actually has to work. They can't all want to extract more from the system than anyone is putting in. If you really think about that, there's actually a beautiful and kind of stabilizing complex geometry to it. But at the base of it is the capacity of the people as a whole to make good choices. And whether it's how they're acting in the market, how they're acting in the state, checking it, if people can't make sense of the types of issues that the world is facing and that the states will be making choices on and that the markets are affecting, if they can't make sense of that well and they can't communicate about it well, all of those systems start to be captured.